Hello, you just caught me finishing a good ghost story. Talk about ghost stories, we all love a good ghost story. But that's what they are, just stories. Nothing more than words grouped together to scare, entertain, and entice people. Ghost stories have been around for centuries, used to entertain around a fire. But how real are they? Well, come with me on a journey as we discover some of the ghost stories that plague our country. Welcome to Gavel in the Grave, the Halloween special. Tales of ghosts and ghost sightings can be found in almost every culture across the centuries. In 2019, a US poll stated that 45% of people claimed that they believed in the existence of ghosts. The first known record of ghosts and spirits comes from the civilization of Mesopotamia. From their tablets, academics have come to understand their views on death. The Sumerians viewed the afterlife with a more dark and dreary view than that of Mesopotamia. In ancient Egypt, there was a well-defined road that the soul travelled from birth to death. Whilst in China, respect was given to ancestors who in turn would offer aid. But it wasn't until Christianity and during the medieval period where the ideas of the ghosts began to sit uncomfortably. According to Christianity, God sat in judgment of all souls, and the good went to heaven and the bad went to hell. So there was very little room for ghosts, because how can the dead return to earth if they have already been consigned to an afterlife for eternity? Yet, ghosts have persisted to be seen and believed throughout Europe. Right, now that we've dealt with a brief history of ghost stories, let's explore some of the ghost stories that you suggested on my group. And to help us with locations, I brought a trusty map. Okay, so our first location and the ghost is from Kent. And the ghost of the Bluebell Hill. The story is this. On the 19th November 1965, 3 women were severely injured in a car accident on the A229. One of the women, 22-year-old Susan Brown, who was from Gillingham, died 5 days after the accident. She was due to marry to an RAF technician. The other 2 females, Judith Lingham and Patricia Ferguson, also died shortly after the accident. Since then, there have been several reports of ghost sightings relating to the accident. The basic story is that a driver was passing the Lower Bell pub on the A229, spots a lone female dressed in white standing at the side of the road. He naturally offers her a lift and she gives him the address. Sometime during the journey, the driver looks in his rear view mirror and discovers the passenger has disappeared. Other variations of the story is that a small purse or handbag is left in the back seat. Or, when the driver reaches the address, the driver is informed by the family that the passenger has died several years earlier. The ghost story has now become one of the best-known ghost stories involving hitchhikers in the UK. And the Bluebell Hill Road is also considered to be one of the most haunted pieces of road in the UK. Okay, so we are now going up to Scotland for our next story and to its capital of Edinburgh. Edinburgh is an ancient city and is considered to be very active in the paranormal. There are many ghost stories linked to the city, but this is one of my favourites, the Green Lady. The story begins in a small village of Morningside, which sits just outside the city of Edinburgh, and was considered to be an affluent area. Sir Thomas Elphinston bought a house in the district following the death of his wife. Despite his grief, it wasn't long till he remarried.
His new wife was a young woman called Elizabeth Pittendale. Once married, she moved into the house with Sir Thomas in Morningside, and they lived happily. However, Elizabeth withheld a secret from her new husband, which was she was previously in love with another man. This man was an army officer known as Jack Courage, and it was thought that they would have felt deeply together, but the relationship had ended due to Jack being stationed overseas. Not long after moving into the house in Morningside, Sir Thomas informed Elizabeth that his son was returning from overseas and was going to be visiting. It is said that Sir Thomas opened the door and greeted his son. Elizabeth was shocked to discover that the son was none other than Jack Courage. One evening, she met with Jack for the final time. Whilst in an embrace, Sir Thomas discovered the two lovers. Sir Thomas was furious and began fighting with his son. This led to Elizabeth being killed by Sir Thomas. Distraught and filled with remorse, Sir Thomas carried his wife's lifeless body to her room and stayed by her side. In the morning, his lifeless body was discovered sitting by Elizabeth's body, and Jack Courage disappeared.
The house was soon up for rent, and the tenants began to report strange noises and happenings during the night, such as shaking of windows, objects falling, etc. It was said that the grief-stricken Elizabeth was wandering the house, asking to be buried elsewhere, as she was buried in the family plot next to Sir Thomas, the man who killed her.
Soon, no one wanted to rent the house from Jack due to the hauntings. He later decided to rebury Elizabeth's body in another plot. This action seemed to have worked, as the hauntings soon stopped. Years later, Jack died and was buried next door to his beloved Elizabeth. Right, so we're going to travel back down to London. Again, London is an ancient city, and again there are many ghost stories linked with the city, but none as weird as this one.
Number 50 Berkeley Square is on appearance a normal Georgian townhouse, but what makes this house special is that it's supposedly the most haunted house in London.
The house was home to a couple of people before eventually being owned by Thomas Myers in 1859. This was where the mysterious event started. Mr. Myers was due to be married and had furnished the house for the couple. However, the wedding never took place, and the jilted and heartbroken Myers soon became a recluse. It was said he would lock himself away in the attic, only to leave the room by the flickering candle at night, until he eventually went mad and died. Over the years, a number of people who have stayed in the attic have had all experienced a strange brown mist, which resulted in many of those staying going insane or died. One such story was a maid was sent up to the room to make the bed for a visitor. However, no sooner had she gone upstairs, she let out a blood-curdling scream. The household rushed up to her for her aid and found her collapsed on the floor, muttering to herself, "Don't let it touch me." She was sent to the hospital for treatment, but died the next day. The visitor, a Captain Kentfield, still decided to spend the night in the room. 30 minutes after going to bed, there was a terrible scream and then a sound of a gunshot. The captain later found dead on the floor with the look of terror upon his face. Another story was that of Lord Lyttelton, who stayed the night in the attic armed with a shotgun for a bet. During the night, he saw the apparition come towards him, and he fired at it. He later claimed that something fell to the floor like a rocket. But the next morning, he couldn't find anything but his shotgun cartridges. But the most famous and well-known story about the haunting of 50 Berkeley Square is the tale of the two sailors who broke in after needing a place to stay. Bedding down in the attic, both were awoken in the night to the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. As the door creaked open, they were faced with a strange, shapeless creature with a huge gaping mouth, which seemed to have slithered into the room. Seized with panic and terror, the two men tried to make their escape. One backed up towards the window, whilst the other rushed past the creature and made his way downstairs towards the safety of the street. The man escaped and returned with a police officer, only to find a smashed window. Looking out of the window, they saw the lifeless body of the sailor's friend, impaled on an iron railing below. Another story is of a man who was skeptical of the rumours of the haunting, and so decided to go into the attic for the night. Before going to bed, he told the household that he would ring a bell in the night if he needed assistance. Just after midnight, the bell began to ring furiously, and he was found in convulsions of absolute terror. He soon died after. It is believed by many that the house is haunted by Myers, whilst others believe it is the spirit of a young woman who killed herself by jumping out the window after being abused by her uncle. Another version of the tale is that a young man was kept locked up in the attic room, was fed through a hole in the door. He eventually went mad and died. One rarer version is that a young girl was killed by a sadistic servant. The hauntings became less over the years, but in 2001, a cleaner while working in the upper room had the overwhelmed feeling that someone was watching her. Around the same time, an employee witnessed a strange mist suddenly appearing in the upper room. So we are just going to take a short trip to Ashford in Kent, to the village of Pluckley.
In 1989, the village was entered into the Guinness World Records as the most haunted village in the country. With just over 1,000 people living in the village, there has been over a dozen ghost sightings within the recent years.
Here are the 8 most remarkable stories.
Highwayman haunting. Fright Corner, which is a road in Pluckley, is the site of one of the ghosts that have had regular sightings. It is believed a highwayman was killed at the location during the 18th century. It is claimed that he got into a fight with those in charge of keeping the peace in the village. They pinned him to the tree with a sword, and it is said that their sword fight is often reenacted, always resulting in the same consequence. Haunted horses. The sound of ghostly horse hooves could definitely chill the blood, but it is a regular occurrence for those living in the village. There are sightings of a horse-drawn carriage along with the clip-clop horse hooves that haunt Moulton's Hill. Red Lady in the Graveyard. Cemeteries can be pretty scary places, and Pluckley has a terrifying reputation. Lady Daring was buried in the graveyard of the local church St. Nicholas during the 1100s in a coffin made of lead with a red rose placed on top of her final resting place. There have been a number of sightings of her, now known as the Lady in Red, after the rose she is often seen wandering the graveyard, wailing while she searches for the grave of a stillborn baby. Menacing Monk. Greystone House was originally built in 1863 and was called Rectory Cottage, as it was the home of the rector of St. Nicholas Church nearby. There has been sightings of a ghostly monk that haunts the location. However, during the recent years it seemed that the monk is hiding himself, as there has been no current paranormal activity. Gypsy Ghost. Pinnock Bridge is the location where it cited a ghostly gypsy woman who had made her living selling watercress she used to collect from the stream below. She is often spotted sitting on the bridge smoking a pipe. It is believed to be the spot where she died after accidentally being burnt to death. The woman often appears as a misty figure who never speaks, simply sitting there smoking her pipe. Pub ghouls. The Blacksmith's Arms has scary reputation with not one but 3 ghosts. It was previously called the Spectre's Arms and the Ghost Arms due to its many hauntings and strange occurrences. Amongst the figures being sighted in the pub, there is a Tudor maid, a coachman who often seen gazing longingly at the fireplace in the public bar, and a cavalier who wanders around the upstairs rooms. The White Lady. St. Nicholas Church has a number of ghosts that have already been mentioned. Another ghost linked with the church is that of the Lady in White, who is said to have stalked both the church and the library of her old family home, Surreyden Daring. This grand house was destroyed in a fire in 1952, but her spirit has been seen by staff of the US Embassy who used the property as base between World War I and World War II. Screaming Woods. The site has become a real tourist trap due to the terrifying reputation. There have been numerous reports of sounds of screaming men and women being heard after dark. It is said to be the sounds of those who have died whilst lost in the misty woods.
The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, Norfolk. One of the most well-known photos of a ghost in existence, the famous photo was taken in 1936 by a visitor of the hall.
Although some have said that the famous photo is nothing more than a clever trick, many more, including the well-known ghost hunter Harry Price, believed it to be genuine. The ghost is believed to be Lady Dorothy Walpole, the beautiful and fun-loving second wife of Charles Townshend.
Despite having 11 children, the marriage wasn't a happy one, with Dorothy spending vast amounts of money on frocks and Charles unleashing his violent temper at a whim. When he discovered that his wife had had an affair with Lord Wharton before their marriage, Townshend locked his wife away and depriving her of contact with her children. Her death remains somewhat of a mystery, for although smallpox was the official cause of death, some claimed that at the time she had been pushed down the stairs, whilst others claimed she was starved to death. In truth, it was more likely she died with a broken heart, longing for her children. Shortly after her death, her ghost began to appear to drift along the landing and down the great staircase by servants and visitors, whilst others claim to spot her standing under a portrait in one of the bedrooms. However, contrary to her gentle nature while she was alive, in death, Dorothy's spirit was cruel and malevolent, which resulted many departure of staff. This once beautiful mistress of the house became a hideous entity who would often stare blankly with dark, hollow sockets. Various famous visitors of the house refused to stay due to the terrifying encounters. Today, Raynham Hall continues to be troubled by her restless spirit, manically searching for her children. The sounds of whispers in the picture gallery and the sounds of rustling silk skirts in the main staircase still startle guests, whilst weighty chairs are known to move by themselves. Okay, we are going back up to Scotland and to Ayrshire and the stunning Culzean Castle.
Rebuilt in the 1770s, the castle developed a formidable look. Situated next to the sea on a cliff, there are mysterious caves located below the castle.
In 1945, the Kennedy family gave the castle to the National Trust of Scotland as a gift.
There are a few ghost stories linked to the castle. One in particular is a ghostly piper who heralds any marriage in the Kennedy clan. He is also heard on stormy nights. He is normally spotted around the grounds and is particularly fond of a spot near the ruined church named Piper's Bray.
Wow. Okay, those are a few scary stories from around the UK. So I asked on the group if anyone had their own ghostly experiences, and some of you were happy to tell me your ghost stories. So here are a few. So the first one comes from Chris Trotter, And he says, one of the most impressive things to happen to me was a pint glass half full of water at the time twist round about an inch, right in front of my eyes. This happened in my work cafeteria of all places. But I knew this was my new spirit guide who recently been introduced to me, letting me know that she was real and that I wasn't imagining it. Well, that's pretty freaky to me. If I saw that, I'd be running out the door, but fair play to you, Chris. Okay, the next person is Liz Brains. I'm sorry if I pronounced your surname incorrectly. But she says, a few years ago, 2015, we were staying in Alston, Cumbria.
We took a trip to Killhop Lead Mine, which is open to visitors. The visitors' mine is just a short tunnel of about 200 meters. You can walk along into the hillside.
Tour guides give you a potted history of lead mining in the area. It's also wet all year round, so you're walking through at least a couple of inches of water, sometimes a bit more. So about 30 of us were on the tour, kids at the front, husbands somewhere in the middle, and me and the tour guide at the back. All suited and booted in hard hats, lights, fleeces, waterproofs and wellies. All very safe. In we went, splish, splash, splosh, guide stops and chats. Kids gets excited, grown-ups ask questions and on we go. Now bear in mind, I'm at the back with the tour guide. No one is behind us. We both hear footsteps behind us. Splash, splish, splash. We stop. The footsteps stop. We look behind us. Nobody's there. On we go, footsteps splashing behind us. We stop. Footsteps stop a fraction of a second. After our stop, again we carry on, footsteps carrying on behind us. We stop again. Guess what? So do the footsteps behind us. Echoes, kids mucking about, or ghostly presence. Near the end, a tragic story is told. One day in heavy rain, a terrible accident happened with a landfall. There were children working the mine on that day. One was caught behind the rocks and left there to die. Were we followed by the ghostly child? Was it a trick of sound? Was it both our vivid imaginations? You decide. So the next one is from Sarah Harker, and she writes, so you might think I'm bonkers. We've been in this new house for 2 weeks, and I don't think we're totally alone here. We have no neighbours, but the other night I heard very faintly 12-bar blues being played on a guitar. Not very well. And my dog kept going to a certain part of the house, but there was nothing. Thankfully, but unusual. When I heard the music, it was a very positive feeling. I felt immense pride. So it could have been a sound imprint. The house is a converted police house, but the previous owners were the ones who converted it into a house about 25 years ago. He was a musician, so music was a very big part of this house. And the final one is me personally. So throughout my years of growing up, I've had a number of ghostly experiences, but this one is quite interesting. So I was on a trip. I went on a trip to Hampton Court with my friend, and we were just walking around Hampton Court, and we wanted to go into the chapel, but the chapel was closed at the time. So we went up to the long gallery, and there you can go through a door that will lead to the balcony that leads to the chapel. And we started to smell a faint smell of incense. It was quite a pungent smell of incense, and naturally you would think, oh, someone's spraying incense, or someone's putting incense to make the atmosphere. So we came back out and we'd spoken to one of the guides that were literally standing by the door of the chapel and asked, did anyone spray incense, or is there a way that an incense smell could manifest? And the guide turned around and said, well, that's very interesting because no one has been in the chapel to put an incense smell in there. But there's been a few reports about people smelling incense, which was quite interesting. So we continued up to the Georgian apartments, and in one of the rooms, again, I smelt a faint smell of lavender. And again, might have thought someone's sprayed lavender in the room, or someone's wearing perfume, but I was completely alone. My friend had wandered off, and I was smelling a very strong smell of lavender. So that's one of my ghostly experiences. So there you have it, ghost stories. I do hope you're not too spooked. Happy Halloween and happy Samhain, and I'll see you in the next episode of Gavel and the Grave. Sarah Harper, and she writes, so you might not think I'm Okay, so we are now going up to Edinburgh for our next story, and it's to its capital of Edinburgh.
Action.
Do you need the light?
Sorry.